Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the English Talk community, your space to grow in English with confidence, clarity, and connection. I'm Julia, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're walking to work, taking a break at home, or just relaxing with your headphones on, this episode is going to speak directly to something you might have felt before, but maybe never said out loud. Let me ask you something. Have you ever studied English for months, maybe even years, followed all the grammar rules, memorized vocabulary lists, passed exams, and still felt stuck when it came to actually speaking English in a real conversation? You're not alone. That feeling is more common than you might think. In fact, it's something I hear from learners all around the world, people who've spent years in classrooms or using language apps, only to discover that when it's time to speak, the words just don't come out naturally. There's hesitation, pressure, and sometimes even fear. But why is that? That's exactly what we're talking about today. Speaking English like a native doesn't require expensive textbooks, long hours buried in grammar drills, or perfect pronunciation. What it really takes is something far more human: connection, practice, and the courage to communicate in real life. And if you've ever doubted your ability to do that, trust me, you're already closer than you think. Because here's the truth. The way English is taught in many places around the world is not always the way people actually speak it in daily life. We learn polite greetings, full sentences, and perfect verb tenses. But native speakers, they use contractions, incomplete phrases, idioms, emotions, and rhythm. And that's where the gap begins. We study a version of English that's clean and correct, but not necessarily alive. So I want to welcome you not just to today's episode, but to a new way of thinking about learning. Here, we believe that English is not just a subject, it's a skill. It's not something you study just to get a certificate. It's something you live. It's how you order coffee in another country, how you express your ideas in a meeting, how you make friends from places you've never been. It's a bridge between your world and the world beyond. And the best part? You're not doing it alone. This is a community of learners from every corner of the world. Listeners from Rome, from Istanbul, from Delhi, from Buenos Aires, from Jakarta, and from cities you may have never heard of, but where people just like you are listening, practicing, growing. So whether you're just starting or you've been learning English for years, you belong here. Now, before we dive deeper, let me ask you to do one simple thing. If you're enjoying this podcast and if this topic resonates with you, hit the like button or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. It might feel like a small action, but it really helps us grow and reach more people who are also on this journey. And more than that, it shows you're committed to making English a real part of your life, not just something you study and forget. Because everything we do here is about practical, real-life English. We focus on how to use the language in situations that matter: talking to coworkers, making new friends, watching movies without subtitles, traveling, or just feeling more confident expressing yourself. And all of that begins with you taking small, smart steps. Like choosing to spend this time listening today. Like opening your mind to a new way of learning. I want to create a space where you feel like we're having a real conversation, where the pressure to be perfect disappears and where your progress is measured not by how many grammar rules you know, but by how naturally you can express your ideas. Maybe you've heard someone say, "I understand everything, but I can't speak." If that's you, you're in the right place. Because this is the episode that's going to shift how you think about speaking English. You don't have to sound like someone from London or New York or Sydney to speak well. Fluency isn't about copying a specific accent. It's about being clear, being confident, and being yourself in English. You already have the tools, and this episode will help you use them in ways that are natural, powerful, and surprisingly simple. Now, you might be wondering, if textbooks aren't enough, what is the path to sounding more natural when speaking? English? What do native speakers do differently? And more importantly, how can you start doing it too, even if you live in a place where people don't speak English every day? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore together. I'll be sharing stories from learners just like you, people from big cities like Paris and Tokyo, Cape Town and Mumbai, who made huge progress not by memorizing rules, but by changing how they practiced and interacted with English. These stories aren't just inspiring. They're full of small tips that you can start using today, and you don't have to wait until your English is perfect to start. In fact, waiting for perfection might be what's holding you back the most. Every step you take now, even the messy ones, even the awkward ones, that's how you build real fluency. So if you've ever felt frustrated, if you've ever asked yourself, why can't I speak the way I want to? You're not broken. You just haven't been taught the way that works best for real communication. Take a deep breath and let go of the pressure. This isn't school. This is your space. To learn, grow, and speak like yourself. No stress, no fear, just English the way it's meant to be. Alive, simple, and full of possibilities. Let's get started. So, let's talk about what this episode is really about. Today, I want to help you understand something that many learners spend years missing. Something that doesn't come from thick textbooks or endless grammar drills. Something that won't be written in your test results, but that will completely change how you speak English and how confident you feel doing. Our focus today is simple but powerful. How to sound more natural in English without using traditional methods or textbooks. If you've ever felt like English sounds different in real life compared to what you learned in school, you're absolutely right. And it's not your fault. Textbooks were designed to teach rules, not rhythm. They were built for structure, not flow. They're great at showing you how to write a formal letter or pass a written exam, but they fall short when it comes to preparing you for that real conversation with a colleague, a stranger, or a friend. And that's the gap we're going to close today, because what I want for you is not just accuracy. I want you to feel ease, flow, confidence. I want you to experience English not as a subject to master, but as a tool to live your life more fully, more connected, and more expressive. Now, what does it really mean to speak English naturally? It means understanding how the language works when it's not being read off a page. It means picking up on the way people pause, the way they change their tone, the way they use small words that carry big meaning, like, you know, or kind, of, or actually. These are the things you miss when you only focus on perfect grammar. These are the things you absorb when you listen to real people in real situations. And the good news is, you don't need to live in an English-speaking country to get that experience. You just need the right kind of exposure and the right kind of practice. That's what we're going to build together. Let me give you an example. Anna is a listener from São Paulo, Brazil. She studied English for 8 years in school. She could read books, write essays, and understand written tests perfectly. But when she traveled to Toronto and tried to have a simple conversation at a cafe, she froze. Not because she didn't know English, but because she didn't know how it sounded in real life. People spoke fast, used contractions, dropped words, and blended sounds. Wanna go became wanna go. Did you eat became did ya eat. These natural patterns weren't taught in any of her classes. But when Anna started listening to podcasts, watching shows without subtitles, and repeating real phrases from conversations, everything changed. She began to recognize those patterns. She started practicing short responses. She focused on being clear instead of perfect. And most importantly, she stopped translating in her head. That shift in focus gave her the confidence to speak up, even if her grammar wasn't perfect. That's what this episode is here to offer you. The idea that fluency doesn't come from knowing every rule. It comes from doing what real speakers do, watching how they speak, mimicking how they sound, listening for rhythm and melody, not just words, and slowly but surely letting those patterns become part of how you speak. Let's take another example. David, a university student from Berlin, learned English in a very academic way. His vocabulary was impressive, and his essays were well-structured. But when it came to having spontaneous conversations, he struggled. He often paused too much, thought about grammar before speaking, and felt anxious that native speakers would judge him. But when he began practicing English by recording himself speaking and listening to his voice, he noticed something important. It wasn't about getting everything right. It was about being able to keep the conversation going. David started focusing on building fluency through short, useful phrases like, "That makes sense," or "I see what you mean." He paid attention to how native speakers react in conversations, how they agree, disagree, and change topics naturally. He realized that native speakers often use simple structures with lots of emotion and variation in tone. It wasn't about complexity. It was about being human in English, and that changed everything. You see, we often believe that to sound fluent, we need to use complicated words and long sentences. But most natural conversations are made up of short, familiar phrases and casual expressions. Fluency is about flow, not about sounding like a professor. It's about knowing how to respond, how to ask, how to clarify, using the kind of language people actually use in daily life. So, the goal of today's episode is to take you away from the textbook and into the real world. I want you to think about English as something flexible, something you can shape to fit your own voice and your own style. Whether you're from Cairo, Seoul, Madrid, Nairobi, or Bangkok, you can develop a way of speaking English that feels natural and true to you. And I want to emphasize this. You don't have to wait until your English is good enough to speak naturally. You don't need to finish another course or memorize another list. You can start today with the English you already know, by using it in real situations, paying attention to how people speak around you, repeating useful phrases, and letting go of the idea that every sentence needs to be perfect. The more you do this, the more you'll notice something amazing. You'll stop thinking in your native language. You'll stop second-guessing every word. You'll start to feel the rhythm of English. You'll hear how native speakers use the language in movies, music, interviews, and you'll be able to use the same kind of language yourself. That's what we're building here. Not just better vocabulary, but better instincts. Not just understanding English, but living it. That's why this episode matters. Because once you realize that natural fluency doesn't come from a textbook, but from real, simple, honest communication, you begin to unlock your real voice in English. If you're listening right now and what we're talking about is making sense to you, if you've ever felt that deep frustration of studying English for years and still not feeling comfortable when it's time to speak, then you're definitely not alone. That experience is more common than you might think. Around the world, there are millions of people just like you. Smart, committed, motivated, who still feel stuck when it comes to speaking English naturally. And the truth is, it's not about intelligence, and it's not about effort. It's about access to the right kind of guidance. And that's exactly what we try to bring you here, every week. So if you're getting something valuable from this episode, here's something really simple you can do that makes a big difference. Subscribe to the podcast and leave a like or a rating, depending on the platform you're using. That one little action tells the algorithm, hey, this content is useful, people are learning from it, let's show it to more learners. It might feel like a small thing, but for a growing community like ours, it means everything. It helps us reach someone in another city or country who might be struggling in silence, not knowing where to start or how to improve. And maybe you've never thought about it this way, but when you like or subscribe, you're not just supporting a podcast, you're actively contributing to someone else's learning journey. Someone who's searching for exactly this kind of support but hasn't found it yet. That's the power of community. And that's why I always say, if this podcast helps you, help others find it too. We're building something real here, not a classroom, not a course, not a test. We're building a space where people from Berlin to Jakarta to Cape Town to Buenos Aires can feel connected by one thing: this desire to speak English confidently and naturally. No pressure, no fear of judgment, just real practice, honest mistakes, and steady progress. And if you feel like you're a part of that, even a little bit, then I invite you to take a second right now, just a second, and hit that follow button. Leave a thumbs up, a rating, or even share this episode with a friend who's learning English too. You see, what we're doing here isn't just for entertainment. It's not about passive listening. It's about transformation. I want you to walk away from each episode feeling more equipped, more inspired, and more capable of expressing yourself in English. And I know that happens one person at a time, one conversation at a time. So when you engage with the podcast, when you show the platforms that this content matters, you're helping create a ripple effect that reaches far beyond your headphones or speakers. Think of it this way. Imagine you're in a group of learners from different parts of the world. Maybe someone from Rome, someone from Hanoi, someone from New York City, and someone from Istanbul. You're all in the same room, learning together, sharing your fears and your victories, supporting each other. That's what this podcast is. A global room, and every time someone subscribes or likes an episode, it's like opening the door and saying, "Come on in, you belong here." And I know it can be easy to skip over this part. Maybe you're multitasking, walking, working out, commuting. But even in those moments, just knowing that you're part of this bigger circle, that's powerful. The more we grow, the more we can offer. More stories, more guests, more practical tools that meet you where you are. And the more voices we have here, the stronger this community becomes. I also want to speak to those of you who've been with us for a while. Maybe this isn't your first episode. Maybe you've already started applying what you've learned. You've tried repeating real-life phrases, shadowing native speakers, or just giving yourself permission to make mistakes. That's incredible. You're not just a listener. You're a learner in motion. And if this space has supported you in any way, your support helps it grow. Your voice matters here. Your experience adds to the collective wisdom we're creating. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I'm truly happy you're here. I know how overwhelming it can feel to find useful English content that doesn't feel boring, formal, or disconnected from real life. That's why we keep things honest, simple, and focused on what actually works. And if this kind of approach feels refreshing to you, I hope you'll choose to stick around. So once again, if this resonates with you, if you found even one idea today that sparked something or helped you understand English a little better, let that be your reason to subscribe. Let that be your reason to tap that like or heart button. It's not just about boosting numbers. It's about sending a message. This kind of learning matters. This kind of support matters. And you're part of making it happen. We don't use ads or promotions on this podcast. We focus entirely on content that helps you grow. That means the best way to support what we do here is organic. It's through your engagement, your presence, and your voice. Even something as quick as sharing this episode on your story or sending it to a fellow English learner makes a real difference. And if you ever think, well, I'm just one person, what does it matter? I want you to remember that every big community starts with one person who chooses to show up. One person who says, "This helped me, and maybe it can help someone else too." That person could be you. So go ahead. If this podcast has helped you speak more naturally, if it's given you new ideas or even just made you feel less alone in your journey, take a second now to support it. Click that follow button, leave a review, and know that by doing that, you're not only helping yourself, you're helping a global community of learners move closer to fluency together. Let me tell you about Ivan. He's from Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, and like many people I've met through this podcast, he had a long history with English before he ever felt like he could truly speak it. Ivan's journey with English started in school, just like it does for many learners. From a young age, he studied grammar rules, memorized vocabulary lists, and passed every written exam. He was the kind of student teachers love, hardworking, organized, always prepared. But there was one big problem. Every time he found himself in front of a native speaker, his mind went completely blank. Ivan told me that he once met a tourist couple from Canada in Sofia. They were lost, looking for a tram stop, and he knew exactly how to help them. He had the words. He had the grammar. But as soon as he opened his mouth, something strange happened. He froze. He could hear the English, sentences in his head, but they came out broken or not at all. The tourist thanked him anyway, but he walked away feeling frustrated, almost embarrassed. And this wasn't the only time. In fact, it kept happening. Despite all the years of learning English through books, Ivan realized he couldn't actually use it in real conversations. He had this growing sense that something was missing from his learning process. He said, "I knew how to write essays, but I couldn't order coffee without panicking." That gap between knowledge and use is something many people experience, and it can be incredibly discouraging. It makes you question all the time and effort you've invested. But Ivan didn't give up. Instead, he started asking different questions. Not, "What am I doing wrong?" but, "What haven't I tried yet?" That's when he made a simple but powerful change. He stopped relying only on textbooks and started immersing himself in English the way people actually speak it. He began watching sitcoms, drama series, and interviews on YouTube. But he didn't just watch them for entertainment. He paid attention. He paused the episodes. He wrote down short phrases. He repeated lines out loud, trying to match the rhythm, the tone, the expressions. He didn't understand everything at first, and that was okay. The important thing was that he was exposing himself to how English sounds in real life. Not in a classroom, not in a textbook, but in conversations. At the same time, Ivan joined an online language exchange community. That was a big step for him because, like many learners, he felt nervous about making mistakes in front of others. But the first time he spoke with someone from Manchester, he was surprised at how patient and supportive the conversation partner was. They talked about simple things: music, travel, food, nothing too complex. But that was the point. It was simple, real, and most importantly, it was practice. Not theoretical, not hypothetical, actual speaking practice. Week by week, Ivan noticed something changing. He wasn't just recognizing more words from TV shows. He was remembering how they were used. He wasn't translating in his head anymore. The responses started coming more naturally. One day, he even surprised himself by joking during a conversation with someone from Sydney. It wasn't something he planned. It just came out. That moment stayed with him because it showed something powerful. He was no longer thinking like a student. He was communicating like a person. What's so important about Ivan's story is that it wasn't about vocabulary. It wasn't about grammar. He already had those tools. What he needed was practice in real, everyday contexts. And once he shifted his focus from studying English to using English, his confidence grew. His fluency grew. He stopped worrying about being perfect and started aiming to be clear, to connect, and to keep the conversation going. There was another part of Ivan's journey that really stood out to me. He told me about how his listening skills improved before his speaking skills. That's something that happens for a lot of learners. When you listen to real conversations, whether it's a podcast, a movie, or a phone call, you begin to understand how people really use the language. You hear fillers like, and kind of. You hear contractions like gonna and wanna. You notice how people interrupt each other, how they pause, how they laugh, how they change topics. All of these details help your brain adjust to the rhythm of real English. And once your brain adjusts, speaking becomes much easier. Ivan didn't need to study 20 more grammar rules to unlock his voice. He needed to experience English the way it's spoken. And that's the real lesson here. Books are useful, classes have value. But if you want to speak naturally, you need exposure and interaction. You need to move beyond controlled exercises and into messy, beautiful, unpredictable human communication. That's where the growth happens. Today, Ivan still lives in Sofia, but he's no longer afraid of speaking English. He works for a multinational company and uses English every day with colleagues from India, Spain, and South Africa. He says that he still makes mistakes, but they don't bother him anymore, because he's focused on connection, not perfection. And that mindset shift has been the most valuable part of his journey. I share Ivan's story because it's not unique, but it is powerful. It reminds us that fluency isn't something you get from memorizing more words. It's something you develop by stepping into real conversations, by listening with curiosity, and by practicing without fear. So if you've been in Ivan's shoes, if you've ever frozen in front of a native speaker or felt frustrated that your years of study haven't led to confidence, I hope his story encourages you. Not to study harder, but to practice smarter. To take one small step toward using English the way people actually use it. Let's take a moment to talk honestly about something many English learners experience but rarely question: the way English is taught in textbooks. For years, most of us have been conditioned to believe that learning a language means sitting in a classroom, memorizing vocabulary lists, filling out grammar exercises, and reading dialogues that sound like they were written by robots. Now, I'm not saying that textbooks are useless. They serve a purpose. They give us structure, introduce basic concepts, and help organize the learning process. But if you want to speak English naturally, fluently, and confidently, textbooks alone will never get you there. One of the biggest reasons textbooks fall short is that they teach a version of English that doesn't match how people actually speak in real life. Think about it. Have you ever read a textbook sentence like, "Hello, how are you today? I am going to the library to borrow a book"? It's grammatically perfect, polite, and clear. But when was the last time you heard someone say that in a real conversation? Native speakers usually don't talk like that. They say things like, "Hey, what's up?" Or, "I'm headed to the library, gotta grab a book." The difference is not just in the vocabulary, it's in the rhythm, the contractions, the informal expressions, and even the tone. And that's exactly where textbooks struggle. They teach rules, but not rhythm. They give words, but not voice. When English learners rely only on textbooks, they end up learning what I like to call classroom English. It's clean, structured, and often too formal for casual conversation. And the problem is, when learners then step into a real-world situation, like talking to a tourist, attending a meeting, or chatting with friends online, they feel lost. It's like they've studied the map but never walked the road. Suddenly, native speakers are using slang they've never seen in a book. They're dropping words, using phrasal verbs, shortening everything. And that creates confusion. Learners start asking themselves, why didn't anyone teach me this? Let's look at a few examples. A textbook might teach you to say, "I do not know." That's clear, correct English. But most native speakers say, "I don't know," or even faster, "Dunno." If you're only used to reading the full version, hearing dunno for the first time might sound like another language. Or take the phrase, "let us go." That becomes, "let's go." And in fast speech, it might even sound like "let's go." These shifts in pronunciation, rhythm, and expression are completely normal in natural English, but they're often missing from traditional materials. Another common issue is how textbooks handle accents and dialects. Most books are written using standard American or British English, often in a neutral tone. But the world is full of different English accents, from Dublin to New York, from Cape Town to Mumbai. Each region has its own way of speaking, its own slang, its own musicality. If you're only trained to understand one version, it can be incredibly challenging to follow a conversation with someone from a different background. Real English is global, diverse, and full of personality. It's not something you can capture in a single grammar rule or scripted dialogue, and we haven't even touched on the emotional impact this can have. Imagine studying English for 5 or 10 years, feeling like you've mastered it, And then, getting completely confused the first time you watch a Netflix series without subtitles. That gap between what's learned in books and what's used in life can be deeply frustrating. It can make you question your ability, your intelligence, even your motivation. But the truth is, it's not your fault. It's just that the method was incomplete. You were given the tools, but not the environment to use them. Textbooks also tend to overcorrect. They focus heavily on what's right or wrong instead of what's natural or understandable. And that creates fear. Learners become afraid of making mistakes, of using informal language, of speaking before they're ready. But the reality is, native speakers make mistakes all the time. They interrupt themselves, change their sentences midway, use vague words like stuff or thing. Real speech is messy, and that messiness is not a problem. It's a sign of fluency. It shows flexibility, comfort, and spontaneity. But most textbooks don't show that side of English. Let me share a short example. I once spoke to a learner named Anika from Mumbai. She told me that she could write beautiful essays, answer complex grammar questions, and score high on language tests. But when she tried to make small talk at an international conference, she felt completely out of place. She didn't know how to jump into the conversation, how to follow the jokes, how to react quickly. She said, "I kept waiting for my turn to speak, but the conversation moved so fast, I never got a chance." That's a very real experience. Textbooks prepare you for scripted turns, not spontaneous exchanges. And that's really what it comes down to. Textbooks give you controlled language, but the world gives you dynamic language. If you're only prepared for the controlled part, you'll feel unprepared for the real thing. So it's not that textbooks are wrong, they're just incomplete. They can be a starting point, but they should never be the end point. This is why exposure is so important. Listening to native speakers, watching real conversations, repeating phrases you hear in interviews or series, participating in language exchanges, these are the experiences that fill in the gaps. They teach you the language between the lines, the hidden music of English that textbooks can't capture. They show you not just what people say, but how they say it, and why they say it that way. When learners start focusing more on natural input and less on memorized output, everything begins to shift. They stop translating in their heads. They start thinking in English. Their ears become more sensitive to rhythm and tone. Their mouths start moving more freely. And most importantly, they stop fearing the language. They begin to live with it, to play with it, to enjoy it. That's the transformation we're aiming for here on the English Talk community. Not just learning English, but living it. And that means moving beyond the textbook and into the real, vibrant, unpredictable world of human communication. Because that's where your voice will truly find its place. One of the most common misunderstandings in language learning is the belief that the more words you memorize, the better you will speak. It sounds logical at first. If you know the words, you can form the sentences, right? But in real conversation, something else is happening. Something you might be missing if you focus too much on words and not enough on sound. That's what I want to talk about today. If your goal is to speak English naturally, clearly, and confidently, you need to start training your ear to focus on sound patterns, not just individual words. Think about how babies learn their first language. They don't start with vocabulary lists. They don't study grammar charts. They spend months, sometimes more than a year, just listening. They hear the same phrases repeated again and again in different situations, and slowly they begin to absorb not just what's being said, but how it's being said. The tone, the melody, the pauses, the rhythm. This is the real foundation of language learning. Before understanding meaning, they understand sound. Now apply that to your English. Practice. Many learners know hundreds of words. They understand basic grammar. But when it comes to speaking, something feels off. Their speech sounds flat, robotic, or overly careful. And here's why. They're trying to speak based on written rules, not spoken rhythm. The difference between a natural English speaker and a textbook learner isn't just vocabulary. It's flow. It's the ability to mirror how English sounds in the real world. So here's the practical tip I want to share with you today. Start focusing your attention on sound. Don't just listen for individual words. Listen to how those words connect. Notice the music of the sentence. Is the voice rising at the end of a question? Is it falling in a statement? Are certain syllables being stressed while others disappear? English, like all spoken languages, has a rhythm. Some syllables are loud, others are soft. Some words are stretched, others are swallowed. If you only focus on the dictionary form of a word, you miss all of this. Let me give you a very simple example. Take the phrase, "What are you doing?" In writing, it looks clear and easy. But in natural speech, it often sounds like, "What you doin'?" or even just, "What you doin'?" If you're waiting to hear each word pronounced carefully, what are you doing? You'll miss it completely. You won't recognize it because you're listening for words, not sounds. And more importantly, when you speak, you'll say it in a way that doesn't match how people actually speak. That can make your speech feel unnatural, even if your grammar is perfect. To begin improving this skill, I suggest starting with very short dialogues. Don't overwhelm yourself with long videos or fast-paced movies right away. Start with a single sentence. Listen to it a few times. Then pause and repeat it, trying to match not just the words, but the sound. Try to imitate the speaker's tone, their speed, their pauses. Don't worry if it doesn't feel perfect at first. This isn't about getting everything right. It's about developing your ear, training your mouth, and getting comfortable with the rhythm of real English. Another helpful practice is something I call shadowing. This is a technique used by interpreters and language learners around the world. You listen to a native speaker and immediately repeat what they say, trying to match their pronunciation as closely as possible. The key here is not to pause and think. You're not translating or analyzing. You're just copying, like a mirror. The more you do this, the more your brain starts to notice the natural patterns of English. You'll hear which words are stressed, where the pauses happen, and how the sentence flows from beginning to end. Let's talk for a moment about stress and intonation. In English, not all words are equal. We naturally stress some syllables more than others. For example, in the word banana, the middle syllable is stressed. Ba-na-na. If you stress the wrong part, it can sound confusing or unnatural. Now think about full sentences. In the question, "Do you want some coffee?" the stress usually falls on want and coffee. The small words, do, you, and some, are spoken quickly and quietly. If you say every word with equal force, it won't sound right. It will sound unnatural and hard to follow. Intonation also plays a huge role. This is the melody of your voice. In English, our intonation patterns help express meaning beyond the words. For example, when asking a yes-no question, our pitch typically rises at the end, "Are you coming?" But when making a statement, our pitch falls, "I'm coming." If you get the intonation wrong, the sentence might still be grammatically correct, but the message can become confusing, or even change completely. Think of how many times people misunderstand sarcasm or emotion just because the tone is flat or off. You don't need a perfect accent to sound natural. That's another big myth I want to clear up. You don't have to sound like an American or a Brit to be fluent. Fluency is not about copying a nationality. It's about being understood easily and expressing yourself comfortably. That comes from rhythm, not perfection. Some of the most impressive English speakers I know have strong accents, but their intonation and flow are so good, you barely notice the accent after a few seconds. So instead of aiming for a native accent, aim for natural rhythm. Let me share a story. There's a woman named Marta from Warsaw. She studied English in school for 10 years, mostly with textbooks. She could write long essays and read novels, but she always felt shy when speaking. Her words came out slow, and she often paused between every sentence. One day, she started listening to podcasts, just like this one. But she didn't just listen. She practiced shadowing. She repeated everything the speaker said every day for 15 minutes. After a few weeks, something amazing happened. She started speaking faster, with more confidence. Her speech wasn't perfect, but it flowed. Her friends noticed the change before she did. They said, "You sound more like you're thinking in English." Now, that's the power of focusing on sound. To help you get started, pick a short scene from your favorite TV series or an episode from a podcast you like. Listen to a 30-second segment. Write down what you hear, then play it again and repeat it out loud, trying to match the speaker's voice. You can even record yourself and compare. The goal is not to be perfect, it's to notice. The more you notice, the more you improve. Training your ear for natural English takes time, but it's one of the most rewarding things you can do. It doesn't just help you understand better, it transforms the way you speak. It helps you feel the language, not just learn it. It brings you closer to the way English really lives in the world. In the rhythm of voices, the rise and fall of phrases, and the music between the words. Let me tell you about Amina. She's from Casablanca, Morocco, and her story is a powerful reminder that fluency in English doesn't always come from grammar, books, or years of traditional study. Sometimes all it takes is a little creativity, consistency, and the courage to do things differently. Amina didn't grow up speaking English at home. In school, she learned the basics, some vocabulary, verb tenses, and the usual textbook dialogues. But for years, English was something she could read and maybe write a little, not something she could confidently speak. Every time she tried to join conversations in English at work, she froze. She would translate in her head, get stuck trying to remember the right structure, and often just smile and stay quiet. Until something changed. Amina works for a company that deals with international clients. Most of their meetings are in English, and at one point she realized that avoiding these conversations wasn't an option anymore. She felt frustrated. It wasn't that she didn't understand what people were saying. She did. But when it was her turn to speak, her mind would go blank. She knew the words. She had learned them. But they wouldn't come out naturally. That's when she decided to change the way she approached English. No more textbooks. No more memorizing rules that didn't seem to help her speak. Amina loved cooking. It had always been one of her biggest passions. She used to spend hours experimenting with recipes, watching chefs from different countries, and sharing dishes with her friends. One day, as she was scrolling through YouTube looking for a new dessert to try, she stumbled on a cooking channel hosted by an American chef. The video was about making a simple apple pie. Nothing special, just a regular recipe. But something clicked. The way the host explained the steps, used casual expressions, and spoke in a relaxed, natural tone made Amina feel like she was part of a conversation, not a class. She thought, what if I learn English through cooking videos? And that's exactly what she did. Every evening, Amina watched one cooking video in English. She didn't take notes, she didn't look up grammar rules, and she didn't worry about understanding every single word. Instead, she focused on repeating what she heard. If the chef said, "Let's whisk this until it's nice and smooth," she paused the video and said it out loud. "Let's whisk this until it's nice and smooth." Over and over, until it felt natural in her mouth. She mimicked the tone, the speed, even the hand gestures. She wasn't just learning phrases, she was internalizing the way English sounded and felt. Soon, she began to notice certain expressions coming up again and again. A pinch of salt. Give it a quick stir. Pop it in the oven. Just eyeball it. Don't worry if it's not perfect. These were not phrases she'd learned in school, but they were real. They were alive. And they made her feel like she was learning English the way it's actually used. She began to recognize how native speakers simplify their speech, how they blend words, and how they use common expressions that never appear in traditional textbooks. After about a month of doing this every day, something unexpected happened. In a team meeting at work, one of her colleagues asked for feedback on a project. Amina, without overthinking, spoke up. Her response wasn't planned. She didn't rehearse it, but the words came naturally. And the best part? She used an expression she'd learned in one of the cooking videos. It looks like we're almost there. Just a few more adjustments and we're good to go. No one laughed. No one corrected her. In fact, the manager smiled and nodded. After the meeting, 2 coworkers approached her to say how confident she sounded. That one moment changed everything for Amina. It gave her the proof she needed, that learning through real-life input, even something as simple as a cooking video, could make her sound more like herself in English. From then on, she took it even further. She started watching travel vlogs, home organization videos, and lifestyle content, all in English. But she always approached them the same way. Listen, repeat, internalize. Not study like a student, but absorb like a friend listening in. What I love about Amina's story is how personal and flexible her learning became. She didn't wait for the perfect course or the ideal language partner. She used what she had, her passion for cooking, and turned it into a daily practice that transformed her English. By listening to real people speak in relaxed, everyday situations, she built an internal library of phrases, intonation patterns, and expressions that she could draw from without even thinking. And here's something important to notice. Amina didn't focus on being perfect. She didn't memorize complex sentences. She focused on rhythm, flow, and comfort. That's the mindset that helped her grow. The moment she let go of pressure and focused on understanding how English sounds in natural contexts, her brain began to adapt. Her ears became tuned to the music of English. Her mouth began to copy that music. And that's what fluency is. It's not just about having the words, it's about knowing how to use them comfortably, in rhythm with the language. If you think about it, cooking videos are actually a brilliant resource for language learners. They're full of imperatives, casual expressions, and practical vocabulary. The hosts usually speak in a friendly, clear tone, and they repeat actions and phrases often. You also get to see visual context. So if someone says, drizzle some olive oil, you see what that means. This kind of learning is immersive without being overwhelming. It's like being invited into someone's kitchen and listening to them chat while they prepare a meal. Amina now leads meetings at her job. She even mentors new hires, many of whom come from different parts of the world and also speak English as a second language. She uses simple, clear phrases, speaks with warmth, and connects easily with her team. Her confidence doesn't come from having a perfect accent. It comes from feeling at home in the language, and that feeling was built one video at a time. So if you've ever felt that studying more grammar isn't helping you speak, or that memorizing lists doesn't make you sound natural, maybe it's time to try what Amina did. Choose something you love. Cooking, travel, DIY, fashion, and start listening. Start repeating. Start living the language the way it really sounds. Like Amina, you don't need to wait until you're ready. You just need to start with what you enjoy and keep going. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in your English learning journey is moving away from isolated words and starting to focus on full phrases. This may sound like a small change, but it makes a huge difference when you're trying to sound more natural and fluent in real conversations. When you learn English by memorizing individual words, what happens is that you create a mental dictionary. One word here, another word there. But when you speak, your brain needs to build the sentence from scratch every time, like assembling a puzzle piece by piece. This takes time and often leads to hesitation, long pauses, or translations from your native language, which slows you down and makes you feel less confident. Instead of focusing on building your English from disconnected words, imagine building it from ready-to-use blocks. These blocks are called chunks or phrases, small groups of words that often appear together in real speech. Phrases like, "I'm not sure about that," "That makes sense," "It's up to you," "I've heard that before," "Let me think," or "What do you mean by that?" These are phrases that native speakers use all the time without even thinking. They're automatic. When you start learning English this way, by absorbing full expressions, you begin to speak with more rhythm and flow, and your sentences start to sound more like those of a native speaker. Let's take a moment to think about how children learn to speak. They don't start by memorizing isolated words. They repeat what they hear. They copy chunks of language they pick up from parents, cartoons, or conversations around them. A child doesn't say, "want, milk, me," and try to figure out the grammar rule. They say, "I want milk," or "Can I have some milk?" because that's what they hear, and that's what they remember. Language is about patterns, not puzzles. And phrases are the patterns that help your brain make faster, more accurate decisions during conversations. If you've ever found yourself stuck mid-sentence because you were trying to remember the right verb, tense, or preposition, then this tip is especially for you. When you speak in phrases, a lot of those small grammar decisions are already built in. You don't have to stop and think about whether to say "in the weekend" or "on the weekend." If you've already heard and practiced the full phrase "on the weekend," I usually relax. It becomes automatic. That's the goal. We don't want you to be thinking about the language while you're speaking it. We want you to use it naturally, without overthinking. Let's look at a few common situations where this can help. Imagine you're in a conversation and someone asks your opinion. If you've learned the phrase, "I'm not sure about that," you can respond immediately, naturally, and with confidence. But if you're trying to remember how to say "not" or "sure" or what order to put them in, you'll hesitate. That hesitation isn't because you don't know English. It's because your brain is still assembling the sentence piece by piece. Now think of how much smoother your experience would be if you had 10 ready-to-use phrases for giving opinions. "I see what you mean." "I totally agree." "That's an interesting point." "I'm not sure I agree." "You could be right." Let's think about it. With just a handful of phrases, you suddenly have a lot more freedom to participate in conversations. This also helps reduce the need for mental translation. When you learn English in phrases, your brain stops going through your native language as a middle step. Instead, you start to connect meaning directly to English. It's faster, more fluid, and less stressful. It also helps your pronunciation and rhythm. Because phrases carry a natural musicality, stress, intonation, and timing, when you repeat them often, your speech starts to sound more connected and authentic. Here's a simple exercise you can start doing today. Choose 5 phrases that you can use in everyday conversation. Start with something simple, like, "I'm just getting started." "Let me check." That's a good question. "I don't know for sure." "I'll get back to you." Now, instead of studying them like vocabulary, use them. Say them out loud. Imagine situations where you could use each one. Practice them in front of a mirror, or while you're walking, cooking, or getting ready in the morning. Don't worry about building full dialogues. Just practice saying those phrases with confidence and clarity. You'll notice that they start to come out naturally when you need them. You can also build phrase banks from the content you enjoy. Watch a short video, a podcast episode, or a movie scene in English. Listen for useful phrases that appear often, or that express feelings, ideas, or questions you often want to communicate. Write them down. Repeat them. Make them yours. You'll start to realize that many native speakers use a small set of familiar phrases in many different situations. Once you know them, you'll feel a lot more in control during conversations. Let me give you an example from a learner I spoke with recently. Her name is Hannah, and she lives in Warsaw, Poland. She told me that she used to freeze in meetings because she didn't know how to enter the conversation. But then she started learning phrases like, "Can I jump in here?" or "just to add something." And that's exactly what I was thinking. Suddenly, she had tools, verbal tools, that made it easier for her to contribute. She didn't need to search for words. She had her phrases ready. That gave her the confidence to speak up. It's not about sounding fancy or using complicated grammar. It's about sounding natural, comfortable, and confident. And the best way to do that is by treating English as a collection of common, real-world expressions, not a collection of grammar rules and vocabulary lists. If you want to start speaking more like a native, focus less on memorizing single words and more on the way people actually speak. That's what will help you connect faster, think less, and enjoy your conversations in English more. Language is a living thing, and the more you practice using real, complete phrases, the more you'll feel like English is truly becoming part of you. So, whether you're talking to a colleague, joining a video call, or chatting with a friend, bring those phrases with you. Let them be your starting point. Let them give you structure, support, and flow. And keep listening for new ones. Every day, the more phrases you collect and practice, the less you'll rely on translation, and the more you'll trust your own voice. That's the key to fluency that feels natural. Let me tell you the story of Lucas, a young professional from São Paulo, Brazil, who had always considered himself advanced in English, at least on paper. He could read fluently, write emails with clarity, and even score well on standardized tests. But there was one frustrating limitation he couldn't seem to overcome: understanding spoken English in real time, especially when watching TV shows or movies without subtitles. It was like a wall he kept hitting, and the more he studied, the more confusing it became. Why could he read an entire article in the New York Times without trouble, yet feel completely lost in the first 5 minutes of a Netflix series? Lucas had done everything by the book. He studied English in school, took private classes, and even got a certificate from an international language institute. But real-life listening was a different world. When native speakers talked fast, used idioms, or mumbled through contractions, he couldn't keep up. He found himself constantly pausing videos, rewinding scenes, and relying heavily on subtitles just to follow what was happening. And the strange part? He understood every word when it was written down. That gap between his passive knowledge and active listening made him doubt his progress, and worse, made him feel like maybe he would never be truly fluent. Then something changed. One evening, after a long day at work, Lucas was watching an old episode of his favorite comedy series. He had already seen it before, in Portuguese. He knew the story. This time, he decided to try something different. He turned off the subtitles completely. At first, it was uncomfortable. He missed a lot. The characters were talking quickly, joking, using sarcasm and expressions he didn't quite get. But he decided not to pause, not to translate. He just watched. The next day, he watched the same episode again. Still no subtitles. But this time, a few things clicked. A phrase here, an expression there. He laughed once or twice, not because of the visual jokes, but because he actually understood the punchline in English. That was his turning point. Lucas started choosing short episodes, usually under 25 minutes, of shows he liked and had already seen. He watched each one 2 or 3 times, always without subtitles. But he didn't just watch passively. He made it an active practice. Every time he heard a sentence that felt useful, natural, or expressive, he paused and repeated it out loud. He mimicked the rhythm, the tone, the pronunciation, even the emotion behind the words. He wasn't just translating in his head anymore. He was training his ears and his mouth to move together. In just a few weeks, he noticed something amazing. Idiomatic expressions started to make sense, not because he looked them up in a dictionary, but because he had heard them enough times, in enough different situations, that their meaning became clear through context. Phrases like, "I'm on it," "that's not gonna fly," or "give me a break" stopped being confusing and started sounding familiar. He was no longer translating. He was starting to feel the language. More importantly, Lucas began to speak differently. In conversations with friends and colleagues who spoke English, his responses became more spontaneous. He didn't pause as much to search for words. He didn't second-guess his grammar. He used full expressions naturally, just like the characters he had been watching. And the funny thing? He hadn't opened a grammar book in weeks. His fluency didn't come from studying harder. It came from shifting the way he practiced. Lucas's experience is a great example of how fluency isn't just about knowledge. It's about familiarity and repetition in real, meaningful contexts. By choosing content he enjoyed and making it part of his daily routine, he turned passive input into active improvement. His ears got used to the speed and sound of English as it's actually spoken. And by repeating lines out loud, he trained his speaking muscles to respond faster, with more confidence. He told me that one of the most surprising benefits was how much more confident he felt in meetings at work. Before, he would rehearse everything he wanted to say in advance. He would write notes in English, then mentally translate them from Portuguese to make sure they sounded correct. But now he speaks more freely. He trusts that the words will come, because they're no longer pieces of vocabulary he memorized. They're part of phrases and expressions he's heard and used over and over again. There's also something powerful about repetition. When Lucas watched the same episode multiple times, he wasn't just reviewing vocabulary. He was reinforcing the music of the language, the intonation, the rhythm, the flow. This kind of exposure helps you move from slow, deliberate speech to natural, automatic responses. It's the difference between building a sentence word by word and having that sentence ready to go when you need it. Lucas's strategy isn't complicated. It doesn't require expensive courses or fancy software. He just picked a show he enjoyed, watched it repeatedly without subtitles, and spoke along with the characters. It's simple, but it works. And it works because it mimics the way we all learned our first language, through listening, repetition, and imitation. He also began to notice small things that textbooks never mentioned, like how native speakers often drop the T in words like don't know, turning it into dunno, or how a phrase like what are you doing often sounds like what you doing. These are the kinds of details that make real English sound very different from textbook English. But once Lucas got used to hearing them over and over, they stopped being confusing and started becoming part of his own speech. By practicing this way, Lucas bridged the gap between what he knew and what he could actually use. He stopped feeling stuck between understanding and responding. And the best part? He started enjoying English again. It wasn't a subject anymore. It was something he could live, laugh with, and express himself through. And that shift, from studying to experiencing, was the key to unlocking the fluency he had been chasing for years. Let me share a technique with you that can be a game changer. In your journey to speaking English naturally, it's called shadowing. If you've never heard of it before, don't worry. I'm here to explain it in simple terms, and by the end of this, you'll probably want to try it out for yourself. So, what is shadowing? Essentially, shadowing is a technique where you listen to a short clip of spoken language, whether it's from a podcast, a video, or a movie, and repeat exactly what you hear, trying to match the pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm as closely as possible. The goal isn't perfection. It's about getting comfortable with the flow of the language and sounding more natural in real-life conversations. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Julia, what do you mean by imitating the pronunciation and tone? Isn't that just repeating words? And yes, that's part of it. But it's about so much more than just repeating what you hear. It's about mimicking the way those words are said, the melody of the sentence, the pauses, the emphasis on certain words, even the emotion behind the voice. It's this attention to detail that helps you sound more like a native speaker rather than someone reading from a textbook. It's how you can go from sounding robotic to sounding fluid. I want to highlight an important part of this practice. Turn off the subtitles. Yes, you heard me right. No subtitles. Now, this might seem scary at first, especially if you're used to reading along while watching videos. But trust me on this one. Subtitles can become a crutch, preventing you from training your ears to catch the natural rhythm and sound of the language. When you rely on subtitles, your brain is more focused on reading the translation than on listening to the sounds and patterns of the language. By turning them off, you give yourself the opportunity to truly engage with the spoken language, forcing your brain to pay attention to how things actually sound in a real conversation. Let's break it down a little bit. The first thing you'll need is a short clip of audio. Choose something that's simple and clear, like a short YouTube video, a scene from a TV show, or a podcast episode. It doesn't have to be long. Start with just 30 seconds to a minute of speaking. This will allow you to really focus on the details. If the clip is too long, it could be overwhelming, especially at first. You want to practice repetition and small chunks to avoid frustration. Once you've got your audio clip ready, press play and listen carefully. Don't start shadowing just yet. Listen to the clip once through to get an idea of the content and how it's being spoken. Pay attention to the rhythm, the stress on certain words, and how the speaker's tone changes. For example, does their voice go up at the end of the sentence or does it drop? Do they speak quickly or slowly? Is there any emphasis on specific words that would change the meaning of the sentence? These little details matter when you're shadowing. After listening to the clip, it's time to start shadowing. Play the clip again and immediately begin to repeat the words you hear. Try to match the pronunciation exactly as you hear it. If the speaker has a strong accent or uses a specific tone, try to replicate that as well. Don't worry about making mistakes or getting it exactly right on your first try. The goal is to get as close as possible to how it sounds naturally. It's important that you don't pause the video and think about it too much. Just let the sounds flow. This isn't about perfection, it's about practice and muscle memory. Repeat this process a few times until you feel comfortable with it. If you struggle with a word or phrase, rewind the video and try again. It might take several tries, but the more you repeat the sounds, the more natural it will feel. The idea is to train your mouth and brain to move together in sync with the language. You're not just memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. You're learning to produce the language in a way that feels effortless. Now remember, I'm not asking you to focus on perfect pronunciation. In fact, I don't want you to get hung up on sounding perfect. Fluency doesn't come from perfection. It comes from using the language confidently and comfortably. Shadowing is about getting used to speaking naturally, even if it's not perfect. When you imitate the flow and sound of native speakers, you're building your confidence and improving your speech without even realizing it. After you've shadowed a few times, take a moment to evaluate your progress. Can you hear a difference in your speech? Does it sound more natural? You might notice that your intonation is smoother, your rhythm is more consistent, and your vocabulary feels more familiar. That's the power of shadowing in action. The great thing about shadowing is that it can be done anywhere, anytime. You don't need to set aside a special time or space for it. Whether you're on your commute, taking a break at work, or relaxing at home, you can always practice shadowing. And it doesn't take long. Just a few minutes a day can make a huge difference. You don't need hours of study to make progress. It's the consistency that matters. And shadowing helps you get the exposure and practice you need to sound more natural without overloading yourself. As you continue practicing, feel free to challenge yourself with different types of audio. You can try listening to more complex materials as you get comfortable, like podcasts, TED Talks, or interviews. The more variety you expose yourself to, the more flexible your English will become. Remember, English isn't one size fits all, and people speak in so many different ways, depending on where they're from, their background, and their personality. Shadowing gives you the ability to adapt to all of these variations and helps you speak in a way that feels genuine. And don't forget, shadowing isn't just for beginners. It's a technique that can benefit learners at all levels. Whether you're just starting out or you've been speaking English for years, the more you practice, the more natural your English will sound, and that's the ultimate goal, right? To be able to speak confidently, fluently, and without hesitation. So, next time you're ready to practice, try shadowing with the subtitles off. Focus on the sound, the rhythm, and the flow of the language. Don't stress about being perfect. Just focus on being natural. And watch how it transforms your spoken English over time. I want to share with you the inspiring story of Hana, a young woman from Seoul, South Korea. Hana's experience with learning English is one that many of you might relate to. Like so many of us, she started studying English for a specific reason. She needed to pass exams. Whether it's for school, a job, or some other goal, exams often become the primary focus when learning a new language. But, as Hana discovered, there's a big difference between studying for exams and actually being able to use the language. In real conversations, Hana had spent years preparing for exams, reading textbooks, memorizing vocabulary, and practicing grammar. She knew the rules, and she could understand English when she read it, or when someone else spoke it slowly. But when it came time to speak, she always felt a huge barrier. There was a fear that held her back. She was scared to make mistakes, scared to sound wrong, and scared to be judged. This fear made her hesitant to speak in English, even though she knew she had the knowledge. The problem was, no amount of exam preparation was going to help her speak with confidence in real-life situations. English, like any other language, is not just about memorizing vocabulary and rules. It's about using the language to express yourself, to connect with others, and to interact in a natural, comfortable way. And that's exactly where Hana was, struggling. One day, while scrolling through social media, Hana came across a post about online conversation groups. These groups were filled with people from all over the world who wanted to practice English by speaking with others in real time. The concept was simple. You could join a group, listen to others, and participate in conversations, all in English. Hana felt a mix of excitement and fear at the thought of joining, but something inside her told her that this might be the key to finally overcoming her speaking anxiety. She decided to take the plunge. She joined one of these groups, and the first time she spoke in English, her heart was racing. She was nervous about making mistakes and worried about what others would think. But surprisingly, the other people in the group were supportive and understanding. They weren't focused on her mistakes. They were just happy to have a conversation. Hana realized that no one was judging her. They were all there for the same reason, to practice and improve, and that was the first turning point for her. At EC. First, Hana's conversations were awkward. She stumbled over words, hesitated, and even made some grammar mistakes. But what she quickly learned was that no one cared. In fact, people in these online groups were more interested in understanding her message than in correcting her grammar. They just wanted to communicate. And Hana found that the more she practiced, the more confident she became. She started to see that making mistakes was part of the process, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was speaking. As Hana continued to participate in these conversations, something amazing happened. She began to speak more naturally. The fear of making mistakes slowly started to fade, and she became more comfortable with the language. She was no longer obsessed with being perfect. She realized that English, like any other skill, takes time to master, and the only way to improve was to keep practicing, mistakes and all. But it wasn't just about the speaking practice that helped Hana. She was also able to learn about different cultures, hear new accents, and see how English was spoken in everyday situations. She began to understand the different ways people express themselves, and this helped her get a better grasp of the language beyond the textbook. It wasn't just about the correct way to speak. It was about learning to express herself in a way that felt real and authentic. One of the most important things Hannah learned was how much speaking practice matters. All the textbooks and exam preparation in the world couldn't help her speak fluently if she didn't practice using the language in real situations. By joining the conversation groups and speaking with native speakers and learners from around the world, Hannah was able to practice the real English, the kind that you don't find in textbooks. She was hearing the slang, the idiomatic expressions, the different ways people interacted with each other, and she started to pick up on these things naturally. Over time, Hannah's speaking skills improved dramatically. She became more fluent, and her confidence grew. The mistakes she made in the beginning no longer seemed so important. What mattered was that she was communicating and that she was being understood. She realized that speaking English wasn't about being perfect. It was about being able to connect with others and share her thoughts and ideas. And once she stopped focusing on the fear of making mistakes, she was able to speak much more freely. Hannah's story is a perfect example of how important it is to practice speaking in a real, low-pressure environment. It's so easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to be perfect before we can speak confidently. But the truth is, perfection is overrated. The only way to get better at speaking is to speak, and to do it regularly. And the more you speak, the more comfortable and confident you'll become. Hannah's journey is a reminder that speaking English or any language is not about avoiding mistakes. It's about practicing, making mistakes, and learning from them. It's about getting comfortable with the language and using it in real, everyday situations. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will become. Just like Hannah, you too can improve your speaking skills by practicing regularly, seeking out opportunities to speak with others, and embracing the process, even if it means making mistakes along the way. Hannah's story didn't end there. As she continued to speak with more people, her confidence grew even further. She started to participate in meetings at work, engage in more casual conversations, and even travel to English-speaking countries, where she felt more comfortable interacting with locals. Her journey wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Today, Hannah speaks English with ease, and she continues to practice regularly, knowing that it's a lifelong process. Her story shows us that the fear of making mistakes is a natural part of the learning process, but it's not something we should let hold us back. By taking small steps and practicing in real-world situations, we can overcome that fear and become more confident speakers. And just like Hannah, we can speak English with natural ease, without being afraid to make mistakes along the way. The most important things I want to emphasize in today's episode is the idea that mistakes are not just inevitable. They are actually an essential part of the process of becoming fluent in English. This might sound a bit strange, especially if you've been focused on perfecting your language skills. But hear me out. Mistakes are part of the journey, and they're something that should be embraced, not avoided. It's easy to think that if we make mistakes, it means we're failing. But in reality, making mistakes means we're learning. Think about it. When you were a child learning your first language, did you speak perfectly right away? Of course not. You stumbled over words, used the wrong tenses, or didn't know how to express certain ideas. But you kept speaking, and over time, you got better. You learned from those mistakes, and with each one, you grew. Now, the same principle applies when learning a second language, like English. The only difference is that because we are older, we often become more self-conscious about making mistakes. We fear sounding wrong or being judged, but this fear is what holds many people back from progressing in their language learning journey. They want to speak perfectly before speaking at all, but this mindset can actually stop you from becoming fluent. I'm sure you've heard the expression, perfect is the enemy of good. This could not be more true when it comes to learning English. If you're focused on being perfect, you'll be afraid to make mistakes, and that fear will prevent you from practicing. You'll second-guess yourself every time you try to speak, and before you know it, you'll be stuck in a cycle of inaction. The key to fluency is not to be perfect, it's to be consistent and to keep speaking, even if you're not getting every word right. Let's take a look at how this works in real life. Think about any native English speaker you know. Even though they speak English fluently, do they never make mistakes? Of course they do. Native speakers mix up words, mispronounce things, and sometimes even use incorrect grammar. But does that stop them from communicating? Not at all. In fact, most native speakers don't even notice these small mistakes. And if they do, it doesn't change the fact that they are able to communicate effectively. So why do we put such pressure on ourselves to be perfect when speaking a second? Language. When you're learning English, you're bound to make mistakes, and that's okay. It's actually a good sign because it means you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you're not making mistakes, it probably means you're not speaking enough. And if you're not speaking enough, you're not going to improve. Mistakes are a natural part of the process, and every mistake you make brings you one step closer to fluency. One of the most powerful ways to overcome this fear of mistakes is to focus on the message you're trying to communicate, not on the perfection of your grammar or vocabulary. When you're speaking, your goal should be to express your ideas clearly, not to speak like a textbook. As long as the person you're talking to understands what you're trying to say, then you've succeeded. No one will care if you make a small mistake here and there as long as your message comes across. So, how can you start embracing mistakes and moving away from the pursuit of perfection? First, start by speaking more. Even if it's just with a friend, a language partner, or by talking to yourself. The more you speak, the more mistakes you'll make, and the more you'll learn. This is how fluency is built. It's built on consistent practice, even if that practice isn't perfect. Second, try to let go of the fear of being judged. When you speak, focus on the conversation, not on what others might think. Most people you speak with, whether they're native speakers or learners, themselves will appreciate the fact that you're making an effort to communicate in English. And if they do notice a mistake, they're likely to be understanding or even correct you gently, helping you learn. But no one will judge you for making mistakes. They'll appreciate the fact that you're trying. Third, try not to be too hard on yourself. A lot of times, we're our own worst critics. We beat ourselves up over small mistakes, and that just makes us more hesitant to speak next time. Instead, try to be kind to yourself. Recognize that learning a language is a long journey, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way. Every time you speak, you're improving, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment. It's also important to remember that fluency isn't about knowing every word or rule in the language. It's about being able to express yourself in a way that feels natural and comfortable. Fluency means being able to have a conversation without constantly stopping to think about grammar or vocabulary. And the only way to get to that level is by practicing speaking a lot and accepting that mistakes are part of the process. Here's another thought. You don't need to be perfect to be fluent. Think about someone who's learned English as a second language and now speaks it every day. They may not use perfect grammar, and they may mix up a few words from time to time. But if you were to have a conversation with them, would you think they weren't fluent? No, because they're communicating naturally, and that's what matters. Fluency isn't about perfection, it's about the ability to communicate and be understood. Another reason mistakes are so important is because they highlight areas where you can improve. If you never make mistakes, you'll never know what you need to work on. When you make a mistake, it's an opportunity to learn. It's a chance to refine your skills and improve your language abilities. Each mistake is a stepping stone on the road to fluency. Remember, the process of learning a language is about progression, not perfection. You don't need to wait until you're perfect to start speaking. In fact, if you wait until you're perfect, you'll never start speaking at all. So, let go of that fear of making mistakes. Embrace them as part of the learning journey and watch as your fluency grows, one conversation at a time. One of the simplest yet most effective strategies for building confidence in English is repetition. Now, you might be thinking, repetition. Isn't that boring? But here's the thing. Repetition isn't about mindlessly saying the same things over and over. It's about reinforcing your ability to use language naturally and confidently until it becomes second nature. When we start learning a new language, everything feels like it takes effort. Whether it's trying to remember vocabulary, form the right sentence structure, or pronounce words correctly, it can often feel like a constant struggle. However, repetition can make these processes easier, faster, and more natural. Let me give you an example. Think about some of the most common phrases you use in your daily life. Phrases like, "Can I help you?" or "I'll get back to you." These phrases have probably become so automatic for you that you don't even have to think about them when you use them. You just say them, and they come out naturally. This is the power of repetition at work. You've repeated these phrases so many times that they've become a part of your muscle memory. This is exactly what you want to do when learning English. The more you repeat certain phrases and sentences, the more natural they will sound when you need them. Let's break it down a bit further. Imagine you are learning to use a phrase like, "I'll get back to you." At first, it might feel awkward to say it because you're not used to using it. You might feel hesitant, thinking, "Am I saying this correctly? Is this the right moment to use it?" But as you repeat it, in different situations and with different people, it starts to feel more natural. The next time someone asks you to follow up on something, instead of hesitating or searching for the right words, you'll confidently say, "I'll get back to you." This is the essence of building fluency through repetition. You want to practice phrases until they become second nature. The more you repeat something, the easier it becomes to recall and use it without thinking too much. This not only helps you speak more confidently, but it also makes you sound more fluent because you're using the language naturally, without the pauses or hesitation that often come from trying to recall words or phrases. Here's a tip. Start with short, useful phrases. Don't try to memorize long sentences or complicated structures at first. Pick up common expressions that you can use in a variety of situations. For example, "How's it going?" or "What do you think?" These phrases are not only easy to use, but they're also versatile. By practicing them frequently, you'll start using them in conversations automatically. And the more you use them, the more comfortable you'll feel when speaking English. Another reason repetition is so powerful is because it builds your confidence. When you repeatedly practice a phrase or sentence, you start to feel more sure of yourself when it comes time to use it in real life. At first, you might have doubts. You might think, "What if I mess up? What if I don't sound like a native speaker?" But as you keep repeating, your brain starts to recognize these phrases as part of your vocabulary, and you begin to trust yourself more. This trust is what will allow you to speak without hesitation. Think about how repetition works in other areas of life. When you first learned to ride a bike, you probably didn't get it right away. You might have fallen off a few times, or you may have wobbled a lot. But the more you practiced, the more confident you became. You didn't have to think about balancing anymore. It became automatic. The same principle applies to language learning. The more you practice, the more automatic it becomes to use phrases, grammar, and vocabulary in the right way. Now, I know that repetition can sometimes feel monotonous, especially when you're just saying the same phrases over and over again. But the key is to make the practice engaging. Use repetition in different contexts. Try using the phrase, "I'll get back to you," in different conversations, maybe with a friend, a colleague, or even in a casual conversation with a language partner. Each time you use the phrase, it will feel more natural, and you'll get better at incorporating it into different situations. Another way to make repetition more interesting is to repeat phrases in different ways. You can change up your tone, speed, or even try using them with different emotions. For example, try saying, "How's it going?" in a cheerful tone, a neutral tone, or a curious tone. This way, you're practicing the phrase in different situations, which will help you sound more natural when you actually use it. You can also use repetition to learn new vocabulary. Instead of just memorizing a list of words, try using the words in context. For instance, if you're learning new vocabulary related to travel, like flight, boarding pass, or luggage, don't just say the words in isolation. Instead, try to create sentences or even short conversations using those words. The more you say them, the more you'll internalize their meanings and be able to recall them when you need them. The key to effective repetition is consistency. You don't need to practice for hours every day, but if you repeat phrases or words just a few times a day, every day, you'll start to notice a huge improvement over time. And remember, repetition isn't just about saying things out loud. You can also repeat phrases by writing them down, listening to them, or even thinking about them in your head. The more exposure you get to these phrases and structures, the easier it will be to use them when it's time to speak. By making repetition a regular part of your language practice, you'll gradually start to speak more naturally. The more you practice, the less effort it will take to use common phrases, and the more confident you'll feel in conversations. You'll stop overthinking and start speaking more fluidly. This is how fluency is built. Through consistent practice, repetition, and a lot of real-life use. As you continue to build your confidence through repetition, remember that it's not about perfection. It's about progress. So, repeat those phrases, listen to them, say them out loud, and before you know it, you'll be speaking English more naturally and confidently than ever before. Now that we've covered some really useful tips and real-life examples, I want to invite you to take a moment and reflect. Think about the strategies we've discussed today and ask yourself, which one felt the most useful to you? Was it focusing on sound instead of individual words? Or maybe it was learning phrases instead of isolated words? Perhaps repetition resonated with you, or maybe it was the idea of not fearing mistakes. Whatever it is, I want you to choose one thing that you feel you can immediately apply in your life. It's important to take these tips from theory to practice. The real power of any learning is when you take the knowledge and make it part of your daily routine. It's one thing to listen to tips and stories, and another to actively use them. You don't need hours to start applying these techniques. You can begin right now, even if it's only for 10 minutes. Yes, just 10 minutes. I promise you, that short amount of time can make a difference. Now think about this. What's something small you can do today that aligns with one of the tips? Maybe you can listen to a short clip of a TV show or podcast in English and focus only on the sound, repeating phrases you hear. Or maybe you could try watching a short YouTube video without subtitles, like Amina did in the story, and try mimicking what the speaker says. I know you might be thinking, but I'm not ready to do this perfectly. And that's okay. Remember, fluency comes with repetition, and mistakes are just part of the process. In fact, they're a natural part of learning a language. So, try to take the pressure off and enjoy the practice. I also want you to think about one of the stories we shared today. Perhaps the story of Ivan from Sofia, Bulgaria, who struggled with speaking despite having learned English from textbooks for years. Once Ivan started practicing with real people through online conversations and watching English shows, everything clicked. Maybe you can do something similar. Could you try joining an online language group? Or chatting with someone you know who speaks English? Or maybe Lucas's experience, where he repeated episodes of his favorite shows without subtitles, can inspire you. If Lucas could improve his listening and speaking by doing that, you can too. It's all about making learning an active experience. What's crucial here is to make it personal. Pick an activity that resonates with you. Maybe instead of watching a video, you'd like to try repeating short phrases that you find useful in your daily life, such as "how's it going?" or "what's up?" These are practical phrases that once you start repeating them will become second nature to you. And don't worry about sounding perfect. The goal isn't perfection. What's important is consistency. The more you practice, the more you'll improve. It's all about starting with small steps. So, today, after you finish listening to this episode, think about what you can do to apply what you've learned. Another great way to apply the advice is to focus on phrases. Maybe you've been memorizing single words up until now, but how about trying to focus on complete sentences or expressions? You could try saying a full sentence like, "I'll get back to you," over and over again until it feels natural. Then, the next time you need to use it in conversation, you'll be able to say it without thinking. If you're wondering how to make this process fun and effective, I'd suggest using a bit of a game plan. Start small. Dedicate just 10 minutes to applying one of the tips today. Whether it's shadowing, focusing on sound patterns, or mimicking phrases, consistency is key. Over time, even these small sessions add up and make a big difference in your fluency. It might feel awkward at first, and that's completely normal. The idea is to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's how growth happens. You might even want to track your progress, just like Amina from Casablanca, Morocco did. She used YouTube cooking videos to learn common phrases and then applied them confidently in her professional life. You can do something similar. Keep a journal of the new phrases or techniques you're trying and note how you feel about using them. This reflective process will help you see how far you've come, and it will also keep you motivated. It's also a good idea to think about how you can incorporate these strategies into your routine. Maybe instead of just waiting for the weekend to practice, you can find small moments throughout your day. You could practice speaking in English while doing your daily chores or walking to work. You don't need to wait for a perfect moment to practice. Make your learning fit into your life in a way that works for you. And if you're struggling to figure out where to start, try choosing just one story or example that stood out to you. Perhaps Evan's shift in how he approached his English practice clicked with you. Or maybe it was Lucas's persistence in watching TV shows repeatedly. Whatever it is, take that one story and use it as a model for your own practice. Think about how you could adapt that strategy to your own lifestyle. Maybe you can practice English while doing something you already enjoy, like watching your favorite movie or listening to music. By taking the advice and applying it in small, concrete ways, you'll not only feel more confident, but you'll also see real progress in your English skills. The key is to avoid overthinking and just get started. Even if it's just a few minutes today, that small effort will help you develop fluency over time. The more you apply these tips, the more natural English will feel for you, and before you know it, you'll be speaking with greater ease. So let's make it personal. Take a moment right now to think about one actionable step you can take today, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Choose a technique and start applying it in your own life. As you do, remember, fluency is not a destination, but a journey. And the first step starts with you today. As we come to the end of today's episode, I want to leave you with a powerful message. You don't need a perfect accent or perfect grammar to sound natural when speaking English. What you truly need is real practice and the courage to try. That's right. Fluency doesn't come from obsessing over every tiny detail. It doesn't come from stressing about whether your accent sounds right or if you're using every grammatical rule correctly. It comes from actively engaging with the language, putting yourself out there, and making mistakes along the way. And that's completely okay. Think about it for a moment. Every person you've ever met who speaks English fluently didn't get there by being perfect. They got there by practicing, learning from their mistakes, and pushing themselves to use the language in real situations. If you focus on the progress you're making instead of aiming for some idealized version of perfection, you'll be able to enjoy the process of learning. Every conversation you have, every phrase you try out, every little bit of practice brings you one step closer to speaking English naturally. It's normal to feel nervous or unsure at times. Everyone has been there. But the key is to keep going. Keep speaking, even if you're not entirely confident. Keep practicing, even if you make mistakes. Every time you try, you're moving closer to the goal of speaking English with ease. And I can tell you from personal experience that the more you embrace this mindset, the faster you'll improve. Now, I know this process can feel overwhelming at times, and you might be wondering, how do I keep going? The answer is simple. You need to stay engaged, stay connected with this community, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep learning. There's no one right way to learn English. The key is to find what works for you and stick with it. There's a world of resources and opportunities to practice out there, whether it's through listening to podcasts, watching videos, joining language exchange groups, or speaking with friends. The options are endless, and just because this episode is wrapping up doesn't mean the journey ends here. In fact, it's just beginning. I encourage you to keep learning, to keep practicing, and to stay connected with this community. You can keep listening to our episodes, where we'll continue to share tips, stories, and practical advice that can help you get closer to speaking English more naturally. Whether you're a beginner or you've been studying for years, there's always something new to learn and every step forward counts. So, what can you do next? It's simple. If you found this episode helpful, I encourage you to listen to another one. There's always more to discover, and every new episode will help you build your confidence and improve your speaking skills. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment to start practicing. Every moment you spend learning is progress. And don't forget, share this podcast with your friends. If you have friends or family who are also learning English, invite them to join our community. The more, the merrier. There's something powerful about learning alongside others, and it helps keep you motivated. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing these tips and stories, send them the link to this podcast. You never know. It might be just what they need to get started or keep going. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to follow this podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We've got a lot more valuable tips, real-life stories, and practical advice coming your way. Following the podcast ensures that you'll always have access to fresh content, and it helps you stay on track with your English learning journey. Remember, there's no rush. Learning English is a journey, not a race. It's okay to take your time, to experiment with different techniques, and to go at your own pace. What matters most is that you stay consistent and keep practicing. Don't worry. If things don't always feel perfect, it's all part of the process. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel. And the more you embrace the learning journey, the more rewarding it will become. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you, speak with courage, practice with consistency, and most importantly, enjoy the process. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep moving forward. The fluency you want is within reach, and every little step you take brings you closer to it. I'm excited to see where this journey takes you. And don't forget, the best way to improve is to keep practicing, so go ahead and take action today. Listen to another episode, practice a little more, and share the love with others. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more confident and natural you'll become. We're all in this together, and I'm so glad to have you as part of this community. Until next time, keep practicing, stay motivated, and never stop learning. You've got this.